If a number is subtracted from its square, the result is 12. Find the number. First thing we need to decide is what our variable is going to be and what it represents. I'm going to choose n for number, and that obviously represents the number that we are discussing in this problem. This number is being subtracted from its square, so I know I'm going to have minus n. It's subtracted from, so this order of subtraction is opposite. What is it being subtracted from? Its square. The result is 12 is telling me that this equals 12. Now I don't really care at all about this problem up here. I just have this equation to solve. First step is to get everything by itself on one side and the other side equal to 0. To factor this, it's a nice easy one because the coefficient is 1. I can put n's here. Two numbers that multiply to be negative 12 and add to be negative 1 will be negative 4 and positive 3. Zero product property then tells me that each of these factors could be set equal to 0. So I get solutions of that n could be 4 or n could be negative 3. If I go back to the original problem, it says find the number. And this answer actually has two problems that could work. So my answers would be 4 or negative 3. A negative number is 30 less than its square. I'm going to choose n to represent my negative number. I am not going to use negative n as my variable. It's just going to be n. When I solve whatever equation I set up for n, I would hope to get a negative number as a result. So I just can use n to represent that negative number. So, if n is my negative number, let's see what equation we can use to represent this problem. A negative number is 30 less than its square. So n is my negative number. This is 30 less than its square. Its square is n squared. 30 less than that would be n squared minus 30. Okay? Less than switches order of subtraction, so I'm not going to do 30 minus n squared. To solve this equation, I need to get all of my variables on one side. So I'm going to subtract n from both sides. Notice the order that I put my terms in from highest power to lowest power. This is nice to factor because it is just a coefficient of 1. So n's there. What multiplies to be negative 30 and adds to be negative 1? Negative 6 and positive 5. Zero product property says I can, not equals, I can set each of these factors equal to 0. So then I get n could be 6 or n could be negative 5. These are my two answers. Now, if we go back to the original problem, I need a negative number. I have two answers. One of them is positive, one of them is negative. So I can throw out the 6 because it is not negative. I am looking for the number that is negative. So the answer to this word problem is just negative 5. Find two consecutive negative odd integers whose product is 225. First thing I'm going to focus on is finding these two consecutive negative odd integers. I can ignore the negative for right now, because if I set up an equation and solve it, I can take the negative answer. So I'm looking at consecutive odd integers. N would be the first integer. If n is odd, the next odd number would be 2 away from that, and then is n plus 2. So these are my two consecutive odd integers. Their product, so I'm going to multiply them together, is 225. Sorry, 255. When I solve this equation for n, I will find my consecutive negative odd integers. So let's focus on solving this equation. First step would be to distribute the n. N squared plus 2n equals 255. I have a quadratic polynomial, something of a power 2, and I need to factor to solve. I need to use a zero product property. So let's first get one side to equal 0. This is a coefficient of 1 problem, so I don't need the factor box. I can just jump to writing my factors here. N will be in the front. These two numbers will multiply to be negative 255 and add to be positive 2. Those two numbers are negative 15 and positive 17. If you didn't know that right away, you're going to have to sit and try to list the pairs of factors of negative 255. I did that ahead of time, so I knew that these two were going to be my result. Zero product property says both of these could be equal to 0. That means n could be 15 or n could be negative 17. Let's go back and read the original problem and to determine if both of these could be our answer or just one of them. I am looking for two consecutive negative odd integers. So that means the 15 is out. This would be the first negative odd integer. What is the next negative odd integer after that? Negative 15. I did not get this 15 from this one that I crossed off at all. I knew that negative 17 was my first odd integer, so negative 15 is the next odd integer. These two are my consecutive negative odd integers whose product is 255. The sum of the squares of two consecutive negative odd integers is 290. Find the integers. So again, I'm going to use n and n plus 2 as my integers. And when I square them, I'm going to get this equation. Here is my first integer squared. The next integer is n plus 2. But remember, the problem is saying the sum of the squares. So that's why I have this squared. The sum, that's the adding sign right here, of the squares of two consecutive negative odd integers is 290. Again, I'm ignoring this negative part right here until the end of the problem. How do I solve this? Well, the first thing you need to do is FOIL out this. I need to get all these terms out there, so I multiplied it out. Then I'm combined like terms on the left side of the equation. I have something squared, I need a factor to solve it. That means my first step is to get one side equal to 0. So I subtracted 290 from both sides and got this equation. These all have a common factor. The greatest monomial factor here is 2. So I factored that out. What's left over inside of these parentheses can now be factored. What two numbers multiply to be negative 143 and add to be 2? We're looking for 13 and negative 11. Zero product property says that I could set either of these equal to 0 and solve those equations to get my answer. So my answer here is negative 13 and negative 13 and positive 11 after all of that. So let's go back to the original problem and determine which one of these, or if both of these, can be my answer. The sum of the squares of two consecutive negative odd integers is 290. Find the integers. I need two consecutive negative odd integers. So in this case, this 11 here does not work. It is a positive odd integer. I need the negative one. So that means negative 13 is my n, and the next odd integer after that would be negative 11. So my two consecutive odd integers that have this property, negative 13 and 11. So to give my final answer, you would say negative 13 and negative 11 are those two integers.